Thank you so much for that introduction. So good afternoon, everybody. My name is Steph, and I am a second-year master's student in the Climate Change and Global Health Research Group. And I'm really excited to talk to you all today about clams and the Food-Water-Health-Nexus in Nunavut, and how clams and clam harvesting contribute to community wellness. So I want to start by positioning myself in this research. I'm a non-Indigenous and non-Inuit researcher and was a visitor to Nunavut during my time there. And I had the incredible opportunity and experience about hearing stories from community members and learning and listening, and really wanted to make sure that I was aware and considerate of the historical context of researchers in Arctic Indigenous communities. So my role in this was really to help center Inuit voices and making sure that their perspective and their narrative is told and really reflected in this work. So Arctic regions worldwide are warming at a rapid rate. In fact, the Arctic is warming an estimated 3 times faster than the rest of the Earth. And this is a pretty crazy statistic, and you might have even heard it before. But sometimes it's difficult to put this into context and what it really means in your own backyard when you don't see it every day. So I want to show you these 2 photos that are just about a year apart, and they are pictures of Frobisher Bay in Iqaluit. And in the top photo, we can see that the bay is completely frozen. So it's safe to walk on, to skidoo on, to hunt on, and to ice fish on. And just earlier, back in December, we can see that the bay is completely open. It is not frozen at all and not safe to do any of those activities on. And this is a pretty crazy change within just 1 year, and it has incredible and immense impacts for communities and their well-being. So specifically, these environmental changes are impacting Inuit communities in the Arctic. And clams are one way that we see all these different factors coming into play together. And this is similar with other Arctic marine ecosystems. So specifically, we were looking at clams, also called Maya truncata. And clams, what's really cool about them, they are almost this perfect One Health case study. And One Health is really the study of human, animal, and environmental health and how all these factors come together and impact each other. So for example, clams are really important culturally. They are important for mental and spiritual well-being, and the act of clam harvesting is a really good physical activity. Clams are also incredibly nutritious. They're high in iron and omega-3 fatty acids, and Inuit have described them as promoting food sovereignty. So food sovereignty is really the right to accessible, nutritious, and culturally appropriate food. And a lot of this is because clam harvesting is pretty accessible. It doesn't take a lot of money to do, as has been described by community members. All you need is a pail and a shovel, and you can usually walk or drive to the nearest beach to clam harvest. They are also really great biomonitors, which is interesting, especially in the context of climate change. So they're good at evaluating wastewater contamination, water quality, and general environmental changes. And this is because of their distinct physical characteristics. So they're filter feeders, which means as water goes through them, they filter out different things in their environment. They also live a pretty long time, usually up to 10 years, but some have lived up to 40. And considering all these factors, and we really think about health and well-being, this also brings up the important question of what is health. And health is not just merely the absence of disease. It's impacted by a whole range of factors, and these are often called social determinants of health. And social determinants of health are non-medical factors that impact our health and well-being. And they come from the environment that we live in, that we work in, that we grow up in. And clams are really this case study for checking off those different social determinants of health, help improve food security, they're a source of income for some people, and environmentally, they play a really big role. So now that we know clams are important, we really wanted to see what kind of research there is out there on clams in Nunavut. So we did a scoping literature review where we screened over 1,200 articles. And at the end of it, there were 24 articles that were included. Now, this graph is showing the primary investigation of each article. So what the main findings that each article we're looking at. So we can see on the right that environmental history was the most common. And this included things like using clams to date back and to see what environments might have looked like. So using fossils and radiocarbon dating and things like that. Next was the biology of clams, and these were studies that looked at the general characteristics of clams, so their size, their weight, and even the abundance of them across different environments. Next is environmental indicators. So like I mentioned before with biomonitoring, these articles used clams in terms of oil spills, wastewater contamination, and general environmental change. And next, we had a few articles that looked at clams in the context of foodborne diseases and illnesses. So I do want to draw your attention to the last three categories here, where there were absolutely no articles that looked at the nutritional content of clams. There were no articles that looked at food security or food sovereignty with clams, and there were no articles that looked at indigenous knowledge and practices surrounding clams. Now, this is pretty big considering we know that clams are important far past just the ability for them to filter things out and tell us about the past history. So we also wanted to see how many of these articles reported Inuit involvement in them. So all of these articles and studies were done in Nunavut and in Inuit communities. So you would hope then that these articles would actually include people from the communities that they were studying. So we can see that there were quite a few that acknowledged community members or governments in the articles, but there were none that shared the results with the community. And out of the 24 articles that were included, only 6 talked about even one of these categories. Now, not having any articles that shared the results with the community is pretty big, right? And if you think about it, going in, you're probably not from the area, right? You might be a researcher from Edmonton or BC, and you're doing research on communities, and these impacts will directly affect those communities, but you're not sharing those results with them. So really, how can they use that information then to make future public health strategies or policies? So this is definitely a really big gap. So now you might be wondering, okay, great, what's next? So we identified that clams are important, but there's a serious lack of research on clams in Nunavut, especially in the context of Indigenous knowledge and practices. So we really wanted to try and fill this gap and use this scoping review to help form another study, a qualitative study, where we could actually see why clams are important to these communities. So the next phase of the study was guided by the National Inuit Strategy on Research. And they really focus on empowering these communities and to have ownership of their own data and their own information so that they can use these findings or whatever the research is, to advance certain policies within their own communities. We partnered with our Nunavut-based research team and conducted a community-led participatory approach. So this included things like storytelling, interviews, focus groups, and really just listening to the community to see what they had to say about clams. Next, we conducted thematic analysis. So this is really looking at those interviews and the stories and the focus groups and seeing what are they saying, what are the major themes here, and how can we tell a story about clams. So we're definitely still in progress with the results and the themes and this bigger story, but some really incredible things have started to come out of it. We know that clams are important across animal, human, and environmental domains, but specifically to Inuit communities, we've heard that they're important for physical health, mental and spiritual well-being, this interconnectedness with the land, and when you're actually clam harvesting and you get to enjoy them. We've heard that it promotes community well-being and bonding within your family and friends, and that it promotes food sovereignty as they're pretty accessible. And this is important, especially as we consider that Arctic communities and food prices are definitely a really big challenge that's happening right now. So having accessible and culturally appropriate food is important. So overall, this is really just scratching the surface, and we know that clams play a really big role in well-being and climate change. And this is something that I hope to continue to learn about. Yeah, thank you so much, and let me know if you have any questions.